Welcome to Those Were the Days. I'm Nancy Martin, the library archivist. The topic of today's program is the history of the Peters Township Ambulance Service. Right off the bat, I'd like to thank Tom and Sandy McMurray for all their help in putting this presentation together. When I first came across the Peters Township VFW Ambulance Service, I was confused by its name. What did a Veterans of Foreign Wars post have to do with an ambulance service? Well, it turns out the ambulance service might not exist at all if not for VFW Post 764 in McMurray. The Peters Township VFW ambulance service can trace its beginnings back to the summer of 1963. At 8:45 p.m. on July 17th, there was a three-car accident on Route 19 near Westminster Presbyterian Church. 3 members of a Peters Township family were killed in that crash. Willard Gilliland, 38, his son Raymond, 15, and his daughter Julia, 12. Raymond and Julia can be seen on the right of this family portrait. 3 other daughters, Ellen, Nancy, and Beth, were injured in the accident. They are the 3 younger children in this photo. Willard was a Peters Township volunteer firefighter and chairman of the department's building committee. His obituary asked for donations to be given to the building fund of the Peters Township Volunteer Fire Department. Ellen, the youngest Gilliland child, who was only 4 years old at the time of the crash, later published a memoir entitled Ripples. In it, she detailed the accident and its aftermath. This is a photo of the family's 5-day-old green Volkswagen bus following the accident, which was caused by a drunk driver in a dark car with no headlights, traveling in the wrong lane. Willard and his 5 children were in this van, driving home from his birthday party at his parents' house. His wife and mother-in-law were in another vehicle. The connection between that tragic accident and the formation of the Peters Township VFW ambulance service was that there was some issue getting enough ambulances to the crash site to transport the large number of people that had been involved. It was thought that more people might have survived had more ambulances been available. The VFW Post 764 in McMurray had been raising money to buy uniforms for its members to wear at events and parades. In the wake of the tragedy, however, a handful of Post members, including Commander Ralph Barton, who became police chief of Peters Township in early 1964, and Bob McMurray, raised the idea of spending the money on establishing a Peters Township ambulance service instead. And thus, the Peters Township VFW Post 764 ambulance service was born. And Peters Township wasn't the only local community whose ambulance service was started by its VFW post. Cannonsburg's service came about the same way. The post wasted no time. In August of 1963, only 1 month after the tragic accident involving the Gilliland family, it acquired a 1954 Superior Cadillac hearse from the Ossipek Funeral Home in Library, PA. Here in this 1964 image from the Pittsburgh Press, you can see the service's 1958 ambulance vehicle and James Ross, Al Roner, Chief Ralph Barton, and Gene Fetty inspecting the ambulance equipment. I have to admit, the vehicle reminds me of the Ectomobile from the Ghostbusters movies back in the 80s. And on Labor Day 1963, the ambulance service started operations. On that day, it responded to an accident at the intersection of Valley Brook Road and Route 19, in which 5 patients were transported to hospital. The service began with only 7 volunteers who provided around-the-clock ambulance coverage to the residents of Peters Township. Something that struck me and that I wanted to highlight is that these ambulance service volunteers weren't hosting card parties or bazaars. They were responding to life and death calls. They saw things that they can never unsee. Think about that for a minute. Think about the kind of people who would voluntarily take on that kind of responsibility. Early volunteers were on call a week at a time. They maybe worked a job all day and then responded to calls during their evenings and nights. A weekend shift began at 6 p.m. on Friday and lasted until 6 a.m. on Monday. Unlike today, when there are male and female bunk rooms in the ambulance services building, volunteers worked out of their homes. They often picked up other team members en route to a call, and they had blue lights they placed on their dashboards of their cars to identify themselves as emergency workers. Ambulance service volunteers were present at the September 13th, 1964 crash of the Finleyville pumper truck on Bebout Road that resulted in the deaths of 3 of the Finleyville Department's firefighters. It was ambulance volunteer David Falloon who spent an hour inside the fuel-soaked cab of the fire truck administering oxygen to 32-year-old Arvin Kegel. From the time of the ambulance service's founding in 1963 until the late 1960s, being a VFW member was a requirement for being a member of the ambulance service. As time went on, women were recruited to provide daytime ambulance service. At the time, women were less likely to work outside of the home, and so were on hand in the township during the daytime. Another effort to provide stable daytime service was the hiring of Bonnie Lucian's father, Fred Carper, as a township maintenance worker around 1966, so that he would be in the township and close to the ambulance garage in case of calls. The Carper family also lived right across the street from the township building in the house that is now the Eye Gallery. Tom and Sandy McMurray highlighted to me the high number of married couples who served together in the service. The service is now a community-wide effort staffed by both men and women. And the problem of providing adequate daytime emergency coverage with a volunteer service was addressed in 1988 when the first paid staff members were hired. An office manager was hired at the same time. Sandy McMurray has served in the position for many years. Although being a member of the VFW was no longer necessary to join the ambulance service, Post 764 has continued to encourage the community to support the service. If you visit the Post's website, the very first thing you see is the red banner at the top of the page, encouraging visitors to the site to support the service. I was surprised to learn that the ambulance service has never been funded by taxpayer dollars or been under township management. In order to support its operations in its earliest years, the ambulance service volunteers and their wives participated in door-to-door subscription drives. For a yearly fee of $5, a family could get ambulance service membership for an entire year. By 1972, the cost had risen to $7. By 1977, it was $10, and by 1984, $25. In 1966, the service replaced its annual door-to-door campaign with a mailer. Residents can now download a PDF form from the service's website. A minimum donation of $70 per family is recommended. Local service clubs and organizations have supported the ambulance service since its beginning when they donated the first equipment. Contributing organizations have included the Lions, Kiwanis and Rotary Clubs, Garden Clubs, the Newcomers Club, and local churches. Fundraisers, including the popular annual Ron Baker's Golf Classic, also help support the service's operations. Ron Baker, the event organizer and a local barber, just passed away in August of this year. The service's equipment was rudimentary in the beginning. It began operations in 1963 with a 10-year-old converted hearse, a cot, an oxygen bottle, and a first aid kit. Tom referred to the service in its earliest days as a, quote, scoop and run operation, in which transportation to a local hospital was the key objective. The service's equipment was housed at several locations before landing at its current permanent location at 300 Municipal Drive in 1997. In the beginning, the ambulance was housed at a garage owned by Ed Swanson, located on McMurray Road not far from the intermediate unit. That garage still stands today. Calls for the service were received by the Barton family or by the Bethel Park Police, who provided police dispatch services to Peters Township Police at the time. When the Swanson garage closed, the ambulance found its way to the McMurray family's driveway. As a teenager, Tom went outside to warm up the ambulance when an emergency call came through. Citizens Water Company later donated a garage to the service. It was set up beside the township building. That donated garage can be seen here on a plate commemorating the ambulance service's 10th anniversary in 1973. When VFW Post 764 purchased the site of its current post on Valley Brook Road, it renovated its building to accommodate a 2-bay garage and crew quarters. That's what can be seen here in these 2 pictures. Finally, the Peters Township School District donated an acre of land to the township, which entered into a long-term lease with the VFW for the purpose of building a facility for the service. Community donations were solicited to fund the construction of the building. This building, the service's current one, opened on October 5th, 1997. Its address is 300 Municipal Drive in McMurray. The move to the new building was not without some drama. It was reported by the Observer reporter on November 1st, 1997, that $600 worth of the service's equipment had been stolen from the VFW post location at the time of the service's move to Municipal Drive. The ambulance service purchased its first new ambulance, a Pontiac, from Fund Superior Sales in 1965. Here's a photo of that vehicle with Fred Carper, Bonnie Lucian's dad, Joseph Herrera, Post Commander Bob McMurray, and James Stoltz. Thank you to Bonnie Lucian for donating this article to the archives. This is a photo of the service's last car-style ambulance that it purchased in 1972. Later vehicles were all van-style ambulances. This 1972 ambulance was the only one purchased by the service that wasn't the traditional red and white color. The number of ambulances maintained by the service increased along with the township's population. By the mid-1970s, the service maintained 2 vehicles. Sometime in the 1980s, it expanded to 3, and in the 1990s to 4. Although the ambulance service was initially staffed by volunteers, they were not untrained. In the early 1970s, members of the service attended one of the first state ambulance attendance programs, the forerunner of the EMT program. In the mid-1970s, Washington Hospital initiated a paramedic program. 5 members of the PT service, Lorraine Jaxtis, Joan Kernahan, Bob McMurray, Sally Newbert, and Virginia Rao, became some of the first paramedics to serve in Washington County. In this photo, I'd like to point out Dave Falloon in the dark pants beside the young man with the mustache, and Bonnie Lucian's dad, Fred Carper, third from left. The geographical area served by the ambulance service has changed over the years. In 1963, the service served only Peters Township in the Hill Station area. In February of 1964, the Lawrence area of Cecil Township was added. The service later served Peters Township, Hill Station, and a small area of North Strabane and Nottingham Townships. As of 2025, the service provides emergency care to Peters Township and the borough of Finleyville. It also participates in mutual aid agreements with neighboring ambulance services. The ambulance service provides a lot more than just emergency medical services and transportation. According to its website, it also offers awareness programs, including stroke, heart attack, sudden cardiac arrest, bicycle safety, and what to do in an emergency to area organizations. Here is a 1972 photo of the principles of first aid being explained to a class by Dave Falloon. The service even assists in the production of anti-drinking and driving documentaries. By 1996, Peters Township School District had been staging a mock accident before its prom for several years. In 1996, the high school's chapter of SAD, Students Against Drunk Driving, decided they wanted to take things a step further. It had the school's media students create an anti-drinking and driving documentary they entitled Project Void, Void standing for Vision of Instant Death. The project was a joint effort by the ambulance service, the police and fire departments, the school district, and the district justice. The Peters Township VFW ambulance service has gone above and beyond minimum service requirements. The service is recognized by the Pennsylvania Pediatric Voluntary Recognition Program as an agency, quote, willing to go above and beyond current requirements to deliver excellence in emergency medical care to children within Pennsylvania. The Peters Township Ambulance Service is recognized at the expert level. This means that its ambulances carry additional pediatric-specific medical equipment. EMS providers have completed childline child abuse background clearances. That the service provides 4 hours of pediatric-specific continuing education each year. That the service is involved in multiple community outreach programs, and that it offers ongoing car seat checks to parents and guardians in the community. In 2015, the ambulance service was the first EMS agency in Washington County to be recognized by the EMSC program. EMSC stands for Emergency Medical Services for Children, a U.S. Department of Health and Human Services program. When I asked Tom McMurray about events that stood out to him about his time with the service, he mentioned the Matthews Mine Fire of 1990. On October 17th of that year, a fire broke out in the Matthews mine in neighboring Finleyville. The mine occupied about 45 square miles, extending from 6 miles from Interstate 79 in Peters east to the Monongahela River near New Eagle. 15 to 20 families living near the mine were evacuated from their homes due to toxic levels of carbon monoxide. Air quality was so poor that Peters Township Emergency Services established a command center at the Crossroads Church of Christ on Thomas Road to be available to residents in need of aid. Ambulances were on standby to provide oxygen to area residents suffering from asthma and other conditions. The service has responded to some unusual emergency calls through the years. One such call occurred in 1998 when the ambulance service was called to 105 McClintock Drive, where it was reported that a 3-year-old boy had been stung by a pet scorpion. Happily, the scorpion turned out to be non-poisonous. When the township began receiving liquid fuels tax money, township officials decided to use the funds to provide free ambulance service membership to any permanent resident of Peters Township age 65 and older living outside of an assisted living facility. Township women played an increasingly active role in the ambulance service. By 1977, they made up about half of the ambulance service volunteers. I love the title of this 1977 article, but hate its sexist tone. The article is of its time, opening with the line, quote, 22 McMurray women have found a way to beat the Hausfrau doldrums, and goes on to report that, quote, the women often find the excitement too much. I doubt that was actually the case. Not surprisingly, the article was written by a man. This 1984 headline tells the story of ambulance service volunteer Marilyn Bowles of Gateshead Drive in Peters Township. On a snowy day in March of 1984, Marilyn was hit from behind while walking along Gateshead Drive by a car that skidded on ice. She was thrown into the air and landed on her back, unconscious, on a sewer grate. Marilyn credited the Peters Township ambulance crew that came to her aid that day with her eventual recovery. After spending 2.5 months in a halo brace and taking the summer to recover, she began volunteering with the Peters Township Ambulance Service. She completed basic first aid training, then CPR training, and, as of the writing of this article in 1984, was scheduled to complete 120 hours of EMT training. Sandy McMurray tells me that Marilyn later joined her working in the office of the ambulance service. I want to highlight a man who was key to the success of this service. Robert W., or Bob McMurray, was instrumental in establishing the service in 1963 and served as its operations secretary for many years. He was an emergency medical technician, a paramedic 1 and 2, and served as deputy coroner for Washington County. In 1984, only a year before his death, Bob was the very first recipient of the Washington County Emergency Medical Service Institute's Star of Life Award. The award recognized Bob's dedication to improving emergency medical service in Washington County. The Peters Township Ambulance Service celebrated its 60th anniversary in 2023. I think that you as a community should be very proud of the service that has grown and modernized alongside the community that it serves. Thank you to Tom, Sandy, and everyone else who has played a role in the success of this service. I recently spoke to 5 classes of 6th graders at Peters Township Middle School about historical achievements of Peters Township. I highlighted the establishment and growth of the Peters Township Public Library and the ambulance service. The kids were very engaged and interested to learn about the history of their community. Here you can see plates commemorating the 10th, 20th, 25th, and 30th anniversaries of the ambulance service that the archives has in its holdings. You can also see the increase in the number of ambulances maintained by the service over time. As of 2025, the ambulance service operates 4 fully equipped ambulances licensed by the Pennsylvania Department of Health. Approximately 30 paid and volunteer members provide emergency services to the township. They include paramedics, advanced EMTs, and office personnel. In November of 2024, Peters Township Council approved $42,000 for a study by Missouri-based Fitch & Associates to evaluate the township ambulance service and recommend improvements. The study was to consider 4 possible scenarios for the service: to maintain it in its current form, to have its operations be assumed by the township, to have a combined fire and EMS service, or to have ambulance services provided by an outside company. Big changes are ahead for the service. After 62 years, the VFW will no longer sponsor it. Tom tells me that the PT VFW ambulance service was the last remaining VFW-sponsored ambulance service in the United States. The township then had to decide whether they would take over the service or contract its services out to others. The township has decided to contract out the service, but as of Monday, December 8th, Council has not made a decision as to which service, AHN or UPMC, to contract with, and has instead instructed Township Manager Paul Lauer to negotiate contracts with both AHN and UPMC. A final decision is to be made in January. This photo of the McMurray family was taken at the dedication of the new ambulance headquarters in 1997. From left are Tom, his sons Michael and Matthew, his mom Dorothy, his daughter Melissa, and wife Sandy. I'd like to again thank Tom and Sandy for all that they contributed to this month's presentation. They were kind enough to meet with me one evening to share their extensive knowledge of the service's history. I decided to end today's program with Ambulance Service Life members Dave Falloon's Ambulance Attendance Prayer, which I found printed in the service's 40th anniversary program. You'll remember that David was the volunteer who administered oxygen to Finleyville firefighter Arvin Kegel in the 1964 pumper truck accident. The prayer reads, "When I hear that ambulance bell and I begin to run, this is the prayer I offer up to the Almighty One. From frozen ears and frozen feet to the elderly so pale, from scalded face and scalded hand to the baby's first wail, from one person who is quietly ill to an accident's noisy band, Lord, grant that I can fill the need that this trip will demand." Thank you for listening, and thank you again to Tom and Sandy McMurray. The next Those Were the Days program will be held on Thursday, January the 8th at 11 a.m. We will be discussing the survey of historical properties that took place in Peters Township in the 1990s. I think it'll be interesting to see how many of the historic properties you're already familiar with, and if there are any that you've never seen before. I also have a favor to ask. If any of you have photographs of the big snow of 1950 or of yourselves enjoying winter activities in Peters Township from any year that are in digital form, or that you'd be willing to send me so that I can make digital copies of and return the originals to you, I'd really appreciate it. I thought February might be an appropriate time to talk about past winters in Peters Township. Thank you.